On a stormy night when thunder cracked like the heavens themselves were tearing apart, Emma stood outside the house she had once called home, her heart pounding with disbelief as her husband Michael's words struck harder than the rain pelting her face. "You're nothing to me, Emma, get out and never come back," and the door slammed shut with such force it felt as if the universe itself had closed against her, leaving her shivering on the porch, a small suitcase at her feet, clutching her dignity. Though it felt as fragile as glass, her tears mixing with the storm until she could not tell which drops belonged to her sorrow and which to the sky, and as she walked down the driveway into the unknown, her soul screamed questions that had no answers. How did the man who once swore to love her forever turn so cold? How did laughter and shared dreams turn into bitterness and exile? And most of all, how would she survive now, cast out with nothing but a broken heart and the faint embers of her hope? For Emma had given Michael not just her love but her youth, her loyalty, her very being, believing in the fairy tale they built together, only to learn that fairy tales can collapse into nightmares. Yet even in that devastating moment something inside her whispered that this was not the end, that though he had discarded her like an old garment, she was still alive, still capable of creating a story beyond this cruel chapter. And so with trembling hands she picked up her suitcase and walked away into the rain, a woman stripped of everything yet unknowingly on the verge of finding herself. And the first months were a battlefield of despair where Emma barely managed to eat, moving into a tiny rented room above a bakery, her days filled with aching silence and nights haunted by the echo of Michael's rejection. But necessity is a ruthless teacher, and soon she forced herself into action, finding work at a small cafe where the shifts were long, the pay meager, and the customers often unkind. Yet she endured, smiling through exhaustion, because survival demanded more than tears, it demanded strength she did not know she had, and slowly the rhythm of work and responsibility began stitching her heart back together. In the evenings, after scrubbing dishes and wiping tables, she would sit at a borrowed desk, studying medical textbooks under the dim light of a single bulb, determined to pursue nursing. A dream she had shelved long ago when Michael insisted her place was by his side as his perfect wife. But now, free from his control, she dared to reclaim the vision she once held for herself, though the path was brutal with rejections, failures, and days when she collapsed into bed wondering if she could continue. Yet each time, she rose, driven by the quiet fire of resilience. And the kindness she poured into strangers became her medicine, for when she held a sick child's hand in the hospital training ward or comforted a grieving family, she found pieces of her own soul healing, as if by caring for others she was sewing together the torn fabric of her life. And in time, Emma transformed into a woman of strength, her once broken spirit now radiant with empathy and purpose, her name whispered in the hospital corridors not as a victim but as a healer, a reminder that pain can either destroy or rebuild. And she had chosen the latter, while meanwhile, Michael's life, built on arrogance and greed, began to unravel like a thread pulled too far. For after driving Emma away he threw himself deeper into his business empire, chasing wealth and status, surrounding himself with so-called friends who praised his power but cared little for his soul. Yet money is a fickle master, and when the markets turned, investments failed, and betrayals multiplied, his empire crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide, leaving him bankrupt, alone, and bitter, and without Emma's steady hand to ground him. His health faltered too, stress gnawing at his heart, alcohol clouding his mind, until the once proud man who had strutted through boardrooms now found himself gasping for air in an ambulance, clutching at life with trembling fingers. And as fate would have it, his collapse led him to the very hospital where Emma now worked, destiny weaving their broken paths back together in a way neither could have imagined. And the moment Emma walked into the emergency ward and saw him lying there, pale and fragile, her breath caught as if time itself had frozen, for the face she once loved and then learned to forget was now before her, stripped of pride, marked by suffering, his eyes darting weakly until they locked with hers, and the recognition between them was a thunderbolt of memory and pain, his lips quivering as he whispered, "You, Emma?" A question laced with both shame and disbelief, for never in his darkest fears had he imagined that the woman he cast out would one day stand over him as his savior. And for a moment Emma's old wounds throbbed as the night he abandoned her replayed in her mind. But then something greater rose within her, a tide of compassion stronger than the chains of resentment, and she placed her hand gently on his, saying softly, "I'm here to help you," words that stunned him into silence, because in his mind he deserved hatred, rejection, perhaps even revenge, but instead he received grace, and that grace pierced deeper than any punishment could, and over the following weeks Emma became his nurse, attending not just to his physical recovery but to the wounds no one else could see, the emptiness left by his choices, and though at first he could barely meet her eyes, the weight of guilt pulling his gaze to the floor. Slowly he began to open his heart in late-night conversations, confessing through tears that pride had blinded him, that he had thought success meant power, that in chasing status he had treated her as less than human, and that kicking her out was the most shameful act of his life, a mistake that haunted him every day since, and Emma listened, not to absolve him but to witness the depth of his remorse, and when at last she spoke, her words carried the wisdom of her journey. Forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, Michael, it's about choosing peace in the present, and with those words, the walls around his heart cracked, letting in light he had long shut out, and as his body healed under her care, his spirit too began to transform, the arrogance fading, replaced with humility, gratitude, and a yearning to be better, and the town soon buzzed with the astonishing story, the woman who had been cast aside returning to save the very man who had once abandoned her, a living parable of compassion that touched every soul who heard it, and as Michael grew stronger, he begged Emma for another chance, but Emma, though kind, was firm, explaining that her return was not to rekindle what was lost but to show that humanity is defined not by revenge but by mercy, that she had built a new life rooted in love and service, and that while she wished him peace, her journey was no longer tied to his, and though his heart ached, Michael understood. For the greatest gift she gave him was not her return as his wife but her presence as his healer, the reminder that redemption is possible when we face our failures with honesty and humility. And with tears in his eyes he said the words that would echo in Emma's heart forever, "You gave me back my life when I gave you nothing but pain. I will never forget this," to which she smiled, not out of pride but out of peace, because she had learned that true strength is not in holding on to bitterness but in letting it go, and forgiveness, though it does not change the past, has the power to transform the future. And years later, Emma's story spread far beyond the town, told in whispers, articles, and speeches, inspiring countless people who felt broken or betrayed, showing them that pain can be the seed of growth, that compassion can heal even the deepest wounds, and that kindness, especially toward those who least deserve it, has the power to change the world. And when Emma stood one evening beneath another stormy sky, no longer the frightened woman abandoned in the rain but a healer, a survivor, and a beacon of hope, she whispered to herself with quiet triumph, "What was meant to destroy me became my greatest strength," and in that truth, she found freedom, her journey reminding all who heard it that life's most powerful victories are not won through revenge or bitterness but through the courage to forgive, the resilience to rebuild, and the love that endures even when tested by the harshest storms.